Hey there, this is equivalent or at least close to a GT 710. This is a Quadro 600. On paper, the speed of it is the same as the GT 710, though it also has 1GB of VRAM instead of 2, and it also only costs $14. And I think this might be actually one of the best budget graphics cards you can get. I don't know. Let's see how it games and see, is it even worth picking up or is it just better left alone? Now, there are 4 versions of this graphics card, a low profile Quadro 600 and a normal profile Quadro 600, but there's also a low profile and normal profile Quadro K600. I don't have the K600, but it's just very slightly faster. And my graphics card is the low profile version of the Quadro 600, which is a slight problem, but it's not going to affect the performance, but basically I had to take the back plate off to actually fit in the computer. As we jump into the desktop, you can see all of the specs on the computer. The 16GB DDR3 RAM, the i5 3450 CPU, and the Quadro 600 with its 1GB of VRAM. Starting off with the first game on the list, it's Minecraft Java with the Sodium mod, and it's on the version 1.18, and the game ran around 8200 frames per second on 5 chunks render distance. I have it on 5 chunks render distance to make sure the CPU is not stressed, because Minecraft is a very CPU intensive game, and it's actually a graphics card bottleneck here, which is nice, because that's what I want, and 80 frames per second to 100 seems really good. And also when it rains, it's only in the 70s to 80s, and that is still perfectly playable. So yeah, Minecraft Java without shaders is pretty nice. But what about with shaders? Well, with the BSL shaders on the light preset, the game was getting a whopping, playable, not really, frame rate of 9. Yeah. Then I lowered the resolution down to 720p, which doubled the frame rate, which normally that'd be awesome if it was getting 30, but no, it's getting now 18. Then I tried to overclock it by putting 835 on the core and 950 on the memory. Surprisingly, somehow it is actually stable. And it gained a few extra frames per second. It went from 18 to 23, so that is a decent improvement, but still not completely great. But maybe, just maybe, some other shader besides BSL might actually run better. Then I tried the complementary shaders at 800 by 600 resolution, and the game was getting around 20 frames per second, which is not very good for 800 by 600. But the thing is, the shaders are also in the ultra priority. I didn't get a chance to lower it to low priority, but yeah, it was in ultra, so I gotta say, probably would have gotten around 30 if it was on low. Somewhere around there at least. Let me just do an edit. When I say ultra priority, I mean ultra preset. It's on the highest graphically intensive option on the complementary shaders. That's what I mean. The Continuum shaders on the lowest preset at 800 by 600 is getting 8 frames per second, so the Continuum shaders are definitely not a very good option with this graphics card. Then I tried the Lagless shaders, and it was actually running quite nice. It was getting over 100 frames per second at 800 by 600, which the shaders don't actually look that good, and I had waving blocks off. But still though, for any shader, that is a quite big achievement for a Quadro 600. Still though, I wouldn't use the shader, but you know, at least it's running. Then I tried to make the resolution a bit better, and I set the resolution to 1080p, and I was still getting 40 frames per second, which is bonkers for this graphics card. And I don't say bonkers often, or do I? I don't think I've ever said bonkers, but basically, yeah, it's running very nice. And if I set the resolution to 720p, it's going to be around 60 frames per second. So if you have a 720p or maybe 900p monitor, this shader would be pretty good for it, even though the game pretty much looks like it did before turning the shader on, except slightly worse, in my opinion. Then I tried Minecraft Bedrock, and it was getting around 60 frames per second locked, and I had the game on the high settings, 1080p, at 16 chunks render distance. Though there was one little caveat, there was a little bit of input lag, not that much input lag, but enough to where if you were going to be doing PvP, you wouldn't really have a chance. So I decided, maybe it's a mouse, because I just tried this mouse for the first time today, so I put a different mouse on, and the computer crashed. That is a first. I don't think it's related to the graphics card, but still though, that's really weird. A mouse crashing a computer. Yeah. Then when it was trying to go back through the BIOS, it would say, hard drive failure! And that is really weird, because the hard drive on here works for a fact. And if I go and unplug the mouse and plug it back in, it still had the same issue, and apparently my external hard drive was causing this issue. I don't know, just something's up here, and I don't know what. It's really weird. After putting the old mouse back on, the input lag basically went away. It was still slightly there, but that is a big improvement. and I'm sure if I lowered the settings a little bit, the input lag would completely go away. The next game up on the list is BeamNG Drive on West Coast USA, 800 by 600 resolution on the absolute lowest settings, and I was getting a whopping frame rate of 30. I know, that's not that good, but still though, for this graphics card, 30 frames per second in this game is pretty impressive, I'd say. Then I tried 640 by 480, and it was getting around 40 to 50 frames per second, which is a even bigger improvement, though the bottom right HUD is a little bit too big. I call it a HUD, it's just a speedometer and whatnot, but that is adjustable and you can make it smaller, so I gotta say, BeamNG Drive is pretty enjoyable on this graphics card at that resolution. Also, remember when I said that the AI overclock was stable? Well, I'm wrong. It's not stable, it's nearly stable, but no, BeamNG Drive didn't like it. I think the memory was a little bit too high, but I messed around with it and I got it working perfectly fine after a while. Also, the game technically isn't on the lowest settings, it's on the lowest intensive settings, but the mesh quality is up to normal, so you can see like signs incoming and you don't run into something because it pops up 5 feet in front of you when you're going 70 miles an hour. And I also have the texture resolution slightly up, though I don't exactly recommend it because it does max out the VRAM and it might start lagging at times. Then I tried 640 by 480 and I was getting around 50 frames per second, which is a nice improvement. And I gotta say, even at this resolution, the game looks somewhat decent. Yes, it doesn't even compare to it on high settings 1080p, but still though, it's nice and it's playable, you know what I'm trying to say? The next game up on the list is CSGO at 1080p on the lowest settings, and it was getting around 50 to 60 frames per second until you got around smoke. Then the frame rate dropped right down into the teens. So maybe let's not use 1080p on CSGO, that probably is a good idea. Then I tried 720p and the game was running a significant amount better. It was getting between 60 and 80 frames per second, which is nice. Now, I don't know exactly how it did in smoke because I don't know how to get smoke, just somebody threw a smoke bomb or something and it made it nice and smoky before, but it should probably stay at least around 20 in smoke, maybe better, somewhere around there. Then I tried 480p and the game was running at the same frame rate basically. The lows might be a bit higher, but besides that, like, it's basically the same. I think the reason why is it seems to be running into a CPU bottleneck because the CPU is sitting around 100% to 98% and the graphics card isn't. So yeah, that's something. The next game up on the list is Muck with the texture resolution all the way onto Ultra and the rest of the settings all the way at the lowest at 720p. And the game was getting around 35 frames per second, but that can be improved if we lower the resolution some more. But before lowering the resolution, I tried overclocking the card again, and it was getting around 45 frames per second now, so that gave it about 10 more frames per second just from a simple overclock. Not bad. Then I tried 800 by 600 and it was getting between 50 and 68 frames per second. So I just used VSync and locked it at 60 and the game ran perfectly smoothly and didn't drop at all. So I guess if you want 60 frames per second, just use 800 by 600 on Muck. The next game up on the list is Dota 2, 1080p at the low settings, and it was getting around 70 to 80 frames per second, and in some spots getting up into the 100s, so Dota 2 is perfectly playable. I don't know exactly how intensive the game gets in the more intensive areas of the game, but at least from what I did here, I don't even know what I was doing to be honest, but whatever I was doing here, it was getting around 80, so I think that's probably pretty good. The next game up on the list is Gas Station Simulator Early Days, and it was getting around 17 frames per second at 1080p on the lowest settings, though the resolution slider was all the way at 100%. When I slid it down to around 70 to 40%, it got a significant amount better frame rate, though the game looked worse. I don't know what resolution it was, but you know, there's a resolution slider in there and it does something, and it made the game run better, so that's good. And it is actually possible to reach 60 frames per second average in this game. Though, the graphics card does definitely get quite warm. It gets up to around 85 degrees Celsius on 100% fan speed. And it's not the thermal paste. I've replaced the thermal paste twice on this, thinking I did it wrong, but no, I didn't. It's just an incredibly hot running graphics card. The next game up on the list is quite impressive for the wrong reason. It is New World, so it's getting around 11 frames per second. on the absolute lowest settings, with an overclock on the graphics card, with the absolute lowest graphically resolution scale, what am I saying? With the absolute lowest resolution in the game as well, and it's getting, not a very good frame rate. Though I am impressed it's actually able to run this game, though I'm not impressed in the frame rate, but I'm impressed in the frame rate that it's actually getting, because some new laptops, like my 4-core Celeron laptop, only gets around 1 frame per second in this game, so that is a quite nice improvement over that laptop, but not really. This game's just really intensive. The next game up on the list is GTA 5 on the normal settings, or realistically it's the lowest settings, but there is no low settings for this game. It's only normal, medium, high, etc. So it's on normal right now, and it was getting around 60 frames per second at 720p. And I gotta say, I had a nice experience in GTA 5 and I have no complaints. Yeah, the resolution could have been higher, but this graphics card also only costs $14, so I don't think I could ask for that much from it. Then I either tried 900 or 1080p, I'm not sure which one this is, but it was getting 30 frames per second. I gotta say, like, for this graphics card to get 30 frames per second at this resolution in this game is pretty impressive. Yeah, I know GTA 5's not a very intensive game at all, and also it's quite old, but still though, it's a nice game, you can have a lot of fun in it, and it's running great on a $14 graphics card. If you paired this with a cheap computer you found like at a garage sale, and you got like a $30 computer maybe, yeah, this wouldn't be bad at all actually. If I didn't go over and do the power supply upgrade and the RAM upgrade, which you don't need to use this graphics card in this computer, I got the computer for free, so technically you would have been getting the same frame rate if you didn't get those upgrades, and this computer would have only costed the price of the graphics card. But realistically, you're looking at maybe $5 to $10 for this computer if you go to, for example, a moving sale, or maybe someone died and they're selling everything in the house. That is those situations where you can find computers like this for a cheap price. Of course, you could look on eBay, OfferUp, and stuff like that too, but at least that's how I find them. The next game up on the list is Roblox Arsenal. Now, Arsenal settings are set onto the lowest, and then Roblox's settings are also almost set onto the lowest. It's set onto the second lowest, so it's basically the lowest settings, but with higher render distance, if I'm not mistaken. And at 1080p, the game was running actually excellent. You could even almost get a high refresh rate experience on this. It was getting around 110 to 120 frames per second. Granted, yes, it's the low settings, but still though, that is a very nice experience, especially for an FPS shooter like this. And if you turn the settings up to like medium, the game would lag a little bit, but it would still get around 50 to 60 frames per second, though I didn't actually record that for some reason. But it does run with higher settings, but I don't really recommend it, especially in this game, because you're focused on aiming and shooting, not looking at fancy graphics that aren't really that fancy anyway because it's Roblox. And now it's conclusion time. Do I recommend you go out and buy one of these Quadro 600s? Well, that is debatable. So, you can't really get much of a better graphics card for the price, if I'm not mistaken. You can get something like an R5 240 for the same price, pretty much. I don't know if it performs better or worse, I don't have one to test it, but you can get modded drivers for those, so you might be able to get a few frames per second more, I don't have a clue. But in general though, if you have like a Dell Inspiron or a Dell Optiplex or just some old computer that has integrated graphics, this would be a nice upgrade for it, and you don't even have to upgrade the power supply. So yes, I do recommend you go out and buy one of these. And if you play the games at lower settings, I think you'd have some pretty good fun with this. Now, if you're trying to play Cyberpunk or maybe New World, no, don't bother with it. But other than that though, this is a nice graphics card. And throwing an overclock on it will definitely help it out a little bit as well. Not insanely, but you might be able to get a few frames per second more.